Namaste. I just want to begin, first of all, by expressing my gratitude to ICMSV, Ashta Alliance, CSAR, and all of the organizations that have worked together to make Sahabhāva a possibility. And a special thanks, of course, to our own Akhil for all the hard work that he's done for this. It's a very meaningful collaboration for all of us on this side of the border. SIMA and Nritya certainly value our relationship very deeply with our sister organizations in Vancouver. And this is a wonderful opportunity to collaborate during a time that has been, shall I say, difficult for many of us. Just a few rules of the road, not rules of the road, just a description of what's going on here. I don't want this evening to be a very formal event. So every evening in my home, which we refer to as Swarashre, whoever is here, students, visitors, myself, we sit together, we talk about music, we make music, we discuss music. And I want this evening to be no different from that. I'm very happy that all of you are with us, that you are in this home, at least virtually. It's a great honor to have you all. I also want you to be aware that aside from Kamal, who's going to be playing Esraj for me, Sayali and Kishan, there are two other denizens of this house, four-legged denizens, that's Baxter and Dobby. They may make occasional appearances or they may make their presence known to you, just so that you're aware of that. So when we were discussing my presentation, when I was discussing this with Akhil, his suggestion was that instead of a performance, I consider doing a lecture demonstration. And I like that idea because for me, performance is an extension of the sadhana, the thinking, the exploration that one does inside. And also an extension of the interactions that we have with each other. Performance is an artifact of that. And so what's really important to me as a musician, as a teacher, and as somebody who loves this art so much, is the exploration of it. And I am very grateful that I have the opportunity to explore this art with you tonight. In particular, I would like, in the course of our discussions here in Swarashre, one of the topics that comes up very frequently is, how is this rag structured or that rag structured? What are the compositions in a rag? How is a rag to be approached, etc., etc., etc. And often we delve into the theory of a particular rag or a particular composition, why it's laid out in a particular way, what is the function of something, and so on and so forth. And I thought that I would take this time to discuss with you one particular rag that I find interesting. This rag is called Anjani Todi. The reasons for this exploration, maybe I'll go into a little later, but I would say just at a 50,000 foot level, why is it so important to me? It's important because it gives us a glimpse into what rags and ragdari was like in the past. So the reason to do this is to try and reconstruct what might have been. In a sense, what we're doing by this exploration is the forensics of music. We have some limited evidence about a particular raga. How do we come to a point where we have a coherent picture of what that raga might have been? I say might have been because when one consults the major musicological works of the 20th century, there seems to be a consensus that there is no consensus. When it comes to rare ragas, people end up creating a picture of that raga for themselves that is consistent and coherent, creates a calculus that is consistent and coherent for that particular school or that particular performer. But that may differ across schools or across gharanas. even across teachers within the same gharana. So what I would have to say today about a raga like Anjani Todi is, this is what I think might be a coherent, consistent picture of this raga. The objective at the end of this process is to have a raga that one can sing. It's not by any means to say that my methodology or my understanding of this raga or my conception of it is universally true and everyone else who might conceive of something different is completely wrong. If I were to get up on my soapbox for just 1 second, I think this is some of what plagues Hindustani music, that plagues our music in general actually. This absolutism of what is truth and what is falsity, that we know truth and everyone else does not. That is definitely not the case. There can be multiple views on a raga, and I just would like to present a particular view to you. Now, what evidence do I have? When I talk about Anjani Todi, what evidence do I have to examine? Well, in sitting here in State College, Pennsylvania, in the United States of America, a small town with very limited resources, there are only a few sources of information that I have access to, of which 2 that I've considered, one of which I've considered very deeply and the other of which I've considered somewhat less deeply, and I'll explain why. The first, the more important source that I've looked at is the work of Pandit Vishnu Narayan Bhatkhande, and the second source is the work of Pandit Ramashrey Jha. To those of us who are familiar with Hindustani music, these names need no introduction. And if you do not know who these people are, contact me separately and I'll be happy to provide you information on who they are. So just for a second, to understand where all of this is starting, I'd like to read to you a short translation of what Bhatkhande has to say about Anjani Todi. All of what he has to say occurs in a page and a half in his massive Hindustani Sangeet Paddhati, Bhatkhande's Sangeet Shastra, and a page and a half of that 4-volume or 5-volume massive tome, he has this to say. He says, and I quote, "I recall having a musical discussion with a Punjabi gentleman in a place called Achabal when I was living in Kashmir. He had sung a dhrupad in Anjani Todi for me, and he had used the swaras Sa, Shuddha Re, Komal Ga, Shuddha Ma, Komal Dha, Shuddha Da, Komalni, Shuddhani, and Tarsa. He used the Komal Dhaivata in the Aro and the Tivra Dhaivata in many places in the Avro. He goes on to say, he was a family man who loved music. He would invite musicians to his home to learn from them. His name was Mangal Sen Kapoor, and he was originally from Wazirabad in Punjab." Thus ends what Bhatkhande really has to say about this raga. He provides some amount of detail as far as, he does include in his Kramik Pustak Malika, he includes a composition, and then he provides some amount of detail on what might have been the outline of that raga based on that one composition. But at the end of this process, he says, you know what, let's not even think about it too much. This is a nirupayogi Todi. It's not an important Todi. Let's move on to more important things. And then he proceeds with a discussion of Multani. So he kind of waves it aside. Now, this passage that he quotes is very interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, the milieu. He's in Kashmir. This is the turn of the 20th century. And in this tiny town called Achabal, which apparently is on the road to Anantnag, he meets this person named Mangal Sen Kapoor. There are a couple of things that I draw from this immediately. First of all, he's meeting somebody who he describes as a householder, somebody who's not invested in music in a professional sense. He has other business that he does. But he's so deeply interested in music that he's able to give information to Bhatkhande ji on this rare raga called Anjani Todi. This speaks to the role of the music in society at that time and the depth to which people had familiarity with music. I also, anecdotally, tangentially but anecdotally, I have other accounts of how people in as late as 1970 would walk down the streets of a small town like Bishnupur in Bengal, and doors would be open and people could hear classical music happening in every house or every other house. And when I say classical music, I don't mean khayal or thumri, I mean dhrupad. So this was the degree to which the society of the time was invested in this music. And I sort of want to think about where we are vis-a-vis that time today, which is very far away. The second thing I want to say is that this person named Mangal Sen Kapoor was from Wazirabad, which is in Pakistan today. So those of us who know about what's happening in general in the political, socio-cultural, religious scenario in North India realize that the soil of the land no longer is the same culturally. Right? This gives us a glimpse of how deeply this music was embedded in that time and how far we have come. The second thing is he makes a point of saying over and over again, well, not over and over again, but he emphasizes that Mangal Sen Kapoor was a family man. And then he kind of dismisses Anjani Todi. To me, that's shorthand for saying that this is not really a great source. I mean, this is somebody who dabbled in the music. But yet, Bhatkhande saw it fit to include in Kramik Pustak Malika. He saw it fit to talk about this raga in his Sangeet Shastra. So therefore, at some level, he valued what Mangal Sen Kapoor had to say. These are kind of small points, but I think they're important. Secondly, just to re-emphasize what this milieu is like, he's in Achabal. Achabal is a tiny town that is known for a Mughal garden that was created by Dara Shikoh in that town. And there is nothing else of note in this town, at least from what I can tell. And I have not done deep research, but it's a small town in Kashmir. And in that milieu, he met this person who gave him this information. These are all important pointers to where things were at that time. So what is it that Mangal Sen Kapoor gave to Bhatkhande? He gave him a composition. So what I'm going to do is I will sing the composition for you based singing exactly the notation that Bhatkhande has outlined in his Kramik Pustak Malika. Now, I want you to keep in mind that I'm doing an exact, or as exact as I can right now, rendition of what is written. But I want this to be a guide that will take us in a direction in trying to discover what this rag is about. Okay? So, with that, can you please turn on the Tanpura? Actually, Kishan, don't turn the tabla. It's okay. The composition is written in Chautal, but I'm going to, just for the sake of illustration, there's a reason why I won't sing with the tabla for right now. I'll just rely on Kamal to give me some support. I want you to hear the melody of what the composition is, and then we'll talk about what we see. Nidra hu nahi avere maaye shama bina mako kab hu avenge nand lal nidra hu nahi avere चंदन भाल मुखते मुरलियाधर गले गले सोहत बन माल निद्रा नहीं आवे गोपन के संग आवत खेलत गलहूँ बैजंती माल कृष्ण प्रभु छवि पर तन मन धन वार डारो निरखत भाई हार निद्रा हो नहीं आवेरी. Let's keep the tanpur at a low volume for me, please. Okay, so here's the outline of the composition. So now if we look at this composition, what can we decipher about this rag? I would like to say that aside from this composition in volume 6 of Kramik Pustak Malika in the Vistar section, there are 8 Vistars listed. And those Vistars essentially hew very closely to the composition. But if one were to take those at face value, it's difficult to construct a coherent interpretation of the raga because there are some very strange sanchars in this composition. When we ascend from dha to shuddhani, or when we ascend from dha to sa, sometimes it's going through shuddhani. In one instance it goes through komalni. There are very weird twists and turns that when you sort of lay it out, things don't fit together properly. So if I were to take that and try to construct something that I can sing over an extended period of time, I'd find myself in a difficult spot. And in fact, the thing about it is, what makes it incoherent is, if I keep singing the same phrases over and over again, it just feels like a jumble of things without any identity. When one looks at Ramashray Jha's work on this raga, again, there's very little on it. There's a page and a half or 2 pages, of which one page is a composition. He talks about this rag as being a mishran of Asavari, Todi, Desi, Bhairav, and Kafi. So if I take 5 ragas which are disparate in that fashion and try to stick them together, what am I going to get other than incoherence? Unless if I really think about what sanchars fit where. And so that's the next step that one has to undertake from this raga. So if I look at how sa is being used, for example, let's just look at it note by note. This sa I can use to launch into a set of phrases. na ra na ra na re ra na ra. It creates a series of phrases. I can also think of notes that generate phrases that go and end on sa. Na or da da ra na ra na ra na da ra na na ra na na ra na ra na. Some phrases that end in sa. So sa is clearly generating phraseology, therefore it has a role as a graha swara. It is clearly a point of rest, so it is a nyasa swara. Right. So it plays both roles here. Okay. Now, if I look at re, I pass through in this composition. What I see is ra 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 na ra no ra ra na ra na re na. I'm not holding my position on re. I move through. It's an anuvadi of the raga. Ga, if I look at ga, ga is unidirectional. I'm not able to move up from ga. The moment I touch ga, I'm falling. Therefore, ga is an avrohi swara. It doesn't occur in the aro. If I want to go up from re, na, 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 no. So the ga doesn't occur in the aro. It's a anuvadi of the raga. Now the ma is a very interesting note. It acts as a graha swara in the sense that I can generate phrases from here. Re, ra, na, na. Ra, na, re, na. But when I take it as a graha swara, it has to be ascending. I'm not able to come down from there. I'm not able to generate swaras or phrases that come down from that madhyam. So in the avro, when I take the ma, ra, na, na, re, I come through, I touch it and keep going. So it's an anuvadi coming down. Ra, na, ra. So unidirectionally, it's very important as a graha swara in the aro, but not so important. It's an anuvadi in the avro. Now pancham is very interesting because it's the gateway to the top of the raga. I'm going through this a little fast because I just want to talk a little bit about the function of each of the swaras and then show you the sanchars of the raga, because this is all at the level of the swara and you can lose the identity of the melody if you just look at the swara. Once we have these established, then I want to talk about the larger sancharas of the raga. From pa, ra, na, na, ra, na, it's generating movement upwards. Oh, one thing I want to say is, one more time, on the ma, when I generate phrase going up, re, ra, na, na, keep this in mind, that the komal dha only occurs in this one phrase. We'll come back to it. The pa, re, ra, na, ra, na, na, re, ra, ra, na. So I can go wait on that pa, re, ra, na, moving up, or I can wait on it coming down. Re, ra, na, re, ra, ra, na, ra, na, ra, ra, na, na. It's a strong nyasa in both the aro and the avro. So the role of the raga, the pancham, is that it's a very strong nyas in both directions, but it's also generating phraseology. So in both directions, the pancham is generating phrases. So it's a graha swara in both directions. And therefore, it's a very, very important swara of the raga. Now, why is this particularly important to discuss at this point? Anjani Todi, it's a raga of the morning. Therefore, its vadi swar has to be in the uttarang of the raga. Now, we'll come to what the role of the dha and the ni are. We'll find that they're not terribly strong swaras in this raga. As a result, the pancham is the best suited in the uttarang to act as a vadi swara. Okay? I'm just going to read this question and then try to address it and move on from here. The question is, when you used sa as the nyasa, did it not give rise to completely different phrases than what was used in the bandish outline? I'm not sure I agree with that. Let's see. So the phrases that I sang were actually extracted exactly from the bandish. So for example, Shyam bina main ko. Okay, then Kabahu avenge nandalal. So I've just extracted those particular pauses in the composition and made them into the nyasa of a phrase. So I'm not sure I agree, but this is from Suresh Ramaswamy. So Suresh, maybe at the end of the discussion, end of the talk, maybe we can discuss this a little further. Okay. All right, so going on to the last two notes of the raga, the dhaivata is again an anuvadi of the raga. As we look at how things are happening in the composition, as I said, the komal dha is only occurring in this one phrase. Now, when Jha Sahab talks about this particular note, he says, Madani sa is coming from Bhairav, which is a position that one can disagree with if one sees Chandrakons as a separate anga. I personally don't, so I agree with Jha Sahab that Madani sa is an extraction out of Bhairav. The komal dha only occurring in that way, going up. Coming down, its role is a little different. So when I look at the composition, so this is coming from Averi. So it appears in kind of an Asavari-like movement there. But also, in order to look at this as a Todi, as I said earlier, this rag was considered a Nirupyogi prakar of Todi by Bhatkandeji. One way to look at this as having membership in Todi is to think about how it is related to Desi Todi. So although in the composition that relationship is somewhat tenuous, we can think about the dha as acting as part of a pivot from pa. There's a shuddha ni there, but other than that, this happens very briefly in the Sanchari of the composition. Avat khelat. So there's a link with Desi Todi that I can see. So I would actually promote the Komal Dha as also being a pivot around the pa. The Shuddha Da, on the other hand, produces phraseology that looks a little bit like Barwa actually, right? So when Jha Sahab talks about it, he says it's related to Kafi. I see a little more of Barwa. This aspect of it looks like Barwa to me. Okay. Then we come to the last note, which is Komal Ni and Shuddha Ni. So the Komal Ni, you see that happening in the Avro. Particularly in Re, Re, Sa, Re, Ni, Da, Pa, but going up in the Aro, or going up in the Aro, it's always that Shuddhani that takes us to the Sa. So, in essence, this is what I see of each of the notes as they're laid out in this composition. Certainly, as Suresh has kind of pointed out, I'm probably taking a few liberties here and there, but the objective here is not only to have a composition that is singable, but also that along with the composition you're able to do a coherent vistar, a coherent badhat that shows a raga swarup that makes sense. So based on this, what do we end up with? What we end up with are vistars that might look like this. ra ra na na re na ra na ra na a ra na ra na na ra na ra na ra na na ra na na ra na ra na na ra na re ra na no na ra na na no ra na na ta na tum ra na ri na ra na na ri na ra na ra ra na ra na ra ra na na ra na ra na ra ra no ra na ra na no ra na na ta na tum te ta ra na na re ra ra na ra na ra na re na ra na re na na ra na ra na re na ra na ra na re ra no ra na na ta na tum. So I just outlined these when I was writing my notes. This is what comes to mind. But now if I take this and try to maybe take it into a jod jhala. Ra na ra na na re ra na ra na no ra na ra ra na na ra na 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 re na re ra na re ra na re ra na na ta na tum ra na te ta ra na te tarana rana rana ji rana 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 dana nom rana re rana na re rana rana re rana re rana re na rana re no rana rana tana tum rana na ranu re rana na re rana na rana re rana rana re rana re na rana re na rana no rana tana tum re rana na rana re rana na rana na rana re no rana re rana rana re rana 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 re rana rana re no rana rana tana tum rana re rana 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 num rana re rana rana re na rana num rana tararana re ranum na rana rana num rana num rana tirarana rana rana na rana num rana num rana tirarana re rana 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 re rana rana re ranum rana rana tum rana re rana re rana 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 re rana re rana rana re ranum rana re num re rana 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 num rana 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 tana num rana rana re rana rana re rana num rana num rana tarana rana rana re rana re rana re rana rana num rana re num rana 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 tum rana tirarana re rana 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 re ranum rana 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 num rana 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 num rana 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 re rana re rana num rana tararana re rana num rana rana re rana num num rana num rana 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 num rana 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 om rana 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 om na tana Questions? No questions? Is that Swaroop clear for everybody? If not, it's a good time to pull it apart further. Clear? Okay. Now there's two other things that I want to look at with regard to what we've laid out so far. The first is, what if I'm trying to sing this rag and I'm not a dhrupadi, I want to sing it as a khayal. So I'm just going to take what is there, I'll try to reformulate it as a jhaptal bandish and just try to elaborate it a little bit as a khayal, so you hear that. This is kind of an on-the-fly operation, so I've done it once or twice, but the intention here is just to show you how the elaboration might occur in a khayal setting. I haven't formalized it as a khayal yet. Those are my caveats. Oops. Sure, I can take questions. Do you want to just read them? Can you please put down the... Say again.
Prithvi is asking if you could clarify the Aroha and Aloha one more time.
Mm-hmm.
And there is another question, does this have any connection with Carnatic Raga or Kapi? It sounds so much alike, especially the
Okay. Second question first. I'm sure there's a relationship there. The Kapi is closer in conception to some versions of Pilu, but there's overlap. So this raga is clearly a mixture of a number of rags, of which the way I'm looking at it, there's a little bit of Barwa which comes from Kafi, and there will be sanchars that will look similar to Kapi, the Carnatic Kapi. So that doesn't surprise me that it appears similar in some places. Prithvi's question. So Prithvi, the thing about it is that when you're dealing with rags like this, sometimes you can't come up with a very clear aro avro. What you can come up with is a chalan, right? There are phrases that happen when collected together, they give you an identity for the raga. So, when I'm moving in the aro, I can lift off this way. But when I'm going up from there, is one pathway, is another pathway. So I can't identify a single aro. Coming down, that's one way I can come down, or even when I'm coming down from pa, I can come down this way, or I can come down. So you can see that from different parts of the scale, I can go in different directions. So when you're dealing with a complex raga like this, there isn't a single aro avro, there's a chalan, there's a set of phrases that together defines the movement of the raga. So this is one of those ragas. Any other questions? It's the way I hear it. This is my interpretation of it. So if you want to put a different andolan, you can see if it's aesthetic or not, and we can think about whether it's coherent in the scheme of the whole rag. The thing that I'll keep emphasizing about rags like this is one has to be consistent in one's calculus once it's established. So I take one andolan one way during one part of the performance, I take it differently in another part of the performance. I take it one way on Tuesday and another way on Saturday. Those things are not allowed. You think about what that andolan is aesthetically, what would fit there, and once you create it, you hold it there. You don't change it. Or if you change it, there has to be a very good justification for why you've changed it. That's my thinking on how one has to deal with something like that. So permissible, if you think that it is fits within the scheme of the rag, it keeps it logical and consistent, of course it's permissible. Anything else? Okay. All right. So while we're getting clarification on the other question, I just see if we can turn this into something that sounds like a khayal. Anindrahu nahi aave Nindrahu nahi aave Maye Sham bina maiko kab ho aavenge nand lal nindrahu aave So you can see my conception of it is kind of falling apart when I'm doing tan. So I'm very unfamiliar with what I've created myself, just beginning to develop it. So, but you can see that if you take it into this kind of akar paddhati and slowly just develop it, there is scope for this to be a khayal also. I haven't thought very deeply about how one might write a chota khayal or anything. As I said, I've just started to think about this rag. But I wanted to give you a glimpse of how one might deal with it in a khayal paddhati. Okay, so then one of the last things, did you get the question? Should we answer that first? Okay, so one of the last things that I wanted to cover was, okay, so as I said, there are different ways of looking at the same rag. What does Pandit Ramashray Jhaji have to say about this? Again, there's, as I said, there's 2 pages of which one is a composition. In his conception of it, the Todi Ang comes from the conventional Todi. That is, he introduces a Komal Re into the calculus. So, Ra, Na, Ra, Na. But he does so in a very particular way. He says this only occurs in the Tar Saptak of the Raga. I don't want to elaborate too much on it, but I'll sing 2 vistars that he's given for this. Let me sing them first and we'll talk about them a little bit. You can see immediately that the Uthan that's going up to the Tar Saptak is showing a very clear Asavari tendency. This is where now the real Todi comes in. So in the Madhya Saptak, this doesn't occur. The Shuddha Re kind of Desi Todi Ang happens in the Madhya Saptak, but the Tar Saptak has the Miyaki Todi Ang. Okay, what does this Vistar have that's interesting? This big Sapa mean happens in both of the Vistars that he provides. The second Vistar he provides is ra na na ra na. So he's taken the same kind of movements but reformulated it in a different way. The reason why I haven't investigated Jha Sahib's version very thoroughly is because he says something which is very meaningful to me. He says that um, when you do analysis of this sort, there's always going to be multiple opinions. No one is going to necessarily agree with what you have to say, but one has to rely on the compositions that are available to try and reconstruct the raga. Well, unfortunately, the only composition he provides is his own, and it's not clear how he formulated that composition. He doesn't provide any information on how he came to that composition or what other sources informed his opinions about this raga. So it's not clear to me how this swarup comes about. Questions? Okay. Could you please demonstrate the two approaches from the point of view of Bhairav as opposed to Chandrakons one more time? I understand that it depends on the context, but would like to hear it one more time to understand it better. Okay. So once more, what I would say about this is that if you look at what is written in the composition, that ang is very clearly Chandrakons. All I'm saying is that the Chandrakons itself does not create an ang of itself. It is under the Bhairav ang. So it's extracted out of that. To follow up on that, what Akhil was suggesting is that what if you take that dha and make it andolit like Bhairav? Which makes it more a part of Bhairav perhaps than just singing. I think that makes sense, but I think we have to think it through a little better. I hope that answers that question. That's also from Suresh. Okay. Oh, one from Kishan. In an instance where the raga swarup is interpreted differently from the way the bandish suggests, would you change the bandish? If not, would you still use the phrases in the badhat? Okay, this is a very good question. So here, what I would say is that there are any number of ragas where the raga swarup is not reflected in the bandishes that are available in the canon, right? So for example, if we look at Shyam Kalyan, the compositions that are provided by Bhatkandeji in Kramik Pustak Malika, many of them do not look like the modern day Shyam Kalyan Swarup. So what do we do in that situation? My sense of it is that one can take that bandish and sing it as it is, but then very explicitly start to use the swarup that we are aware of. Unless, of course, there's a well-defined swarup, there's a set of bandishes that looks very different from another set. If that happens, then we can say that there's a separate aspect to this raga, there's another version of this raga, and these bandishes support that. Otherwise, if there are idiosyncratic passages in compositions, that happens all the time, it's best not to use them in your badhat. It is an expression of how the composer saw certain corners that perhaps are not part of the normal badhat of the raga. And he or she was trying to elucidate what was there that he or she saw that may not be part of the usual badhat of the raga. It's best not to use those because that stands on its own. It's an artistic vision that the composer had, and you appreciate it through the composition that you sing. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Other questions? Okay. So actually that kind of brings me to the end of what I have. How am I doing on time? Okay. So if there are questions, I'll be very happy to take them. I guess that was much shorter than I thought it would be. Namaskar, Suresh. How are you? Good. From my perspective, basically at this point in my thinking about the raga, I have now a, uh, a progression of movement that makes sense to me, right? So there are many decision points in this raga. In a complex raga like this, one goes from decision point to decision point, and different avenues in the raga start to open up. Like I said, there's Barwa, in parts there's Desi, in parts there's Asavari, in parts there's Kafi, in parts. Many different aspects that will open up. And so that starts to give you a sense of what the possibilities are in Badhat. But when you're doing that, you also discover which combinations of phraseology, when sung together, produces a more aesthetic effect. And at that point, you start to think about, okay, what if I were to try and capture this inside of a composition? So what is required for a raga to achieve ragatva is for many musicians to start exploring this space, and in that process to start composing their own compositions, both in dhrutalay as well as in vilambitlay, and that starts to develop a core of material around which the swarup of the raga is preserved. So right now what we have is a meta swarup, right? I've just given you a set of things that can be done, but that is ultimately captured in the canon of compositions that forms as a result of many musicians exploring that space. So I think in a situation like this, that's kind of the next step, and that is actually the motivation behind why such an exploration is done. That okay, I think I've discovered something that looks coherent. What can be done from here? So I can't give you all the answers. Here's what I have. What's next? Does that answer your question, Suresh?
Yes, I did that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. No other questions? Any questions in the house? So another motivation for why we do this kind of work, this is me again gingerly getting up on my soapbox. We have a situation now, especially in Hindustani music, more so than Carnatic music, but Hindustani music in particular, that concerts, events are typically held, especially in the United States and Canada and the West, well, North America, typically in the evening on a weekend. And I don't think that that allows for us to fully explore all of the ragas that have been bequeathed to us. And in particular, it leads to a certain narrowing of viewpoints. And the repertoire that is sung on stage starts to narrow. The approach to that repertoire starts to narrow because artists start to understand what the audience is looking for from the perspective of a particular aesthetic. And so what is presented is one type of music. Now, the issue that I have with this is that our musical heritage consists of hundreds, if not thousands, of ragas. And of these, only a very small set are explored. And that exploration, that lack of exploration, has to do with many reasons. But one reason is a lack of inquisitiveness from our musicians, from our scholars, from our audiences, to try and grow what we have. And I think the work that I'm doing on this is an attempt to start to move us in a direction where there's more available to us as artists, as connoisseurs, as listeners, as participants, as students. And this has to be work that continues and grows and gets into larger and larger areas of our artistic heritage in this particular musical form. So that's why I do this kind of work. I wanted to put that statement out there.
I think we partly answered it, but Gayatri Aunty asked, why was this rag historically neglected by the canon?
It's hard to know. The question from Gayatri is, why was this raga historically neglected by the canon? It's a very good question, and there's typically many reasons that this happens. One is that the information related to the raga, as you can see, we're doing kind of a forensic analysis on the basis of very limited information to try and reconstruct it. Well, why do we have limited information? It's very likely that the information was hidden from researchers like Bhatkandeji. And that there was further information at one time, but now it's not available to us. That the reasons for hiding that information are perhaps well known to those of us who have studied the music at a deeper level. It has to do with the socio-economic, cultural circumstances of the gharana. So there was that. But also, Anjani Todi is just an extreme example. There are many rags for which there is information, but they're simply not handled by musicians. They're simply not explored. They're simply not listened to by audiences. And it has to do with popular culture infiltrating classical music. Their expectations of an artist, as far as the ragas that are rendered, their expectations of how those ragas are rendered, and that leaves a huge amount of the canon behind. So that's what is the reason, I feel.
There are a couple of questions. One of them is mine. So Moha was wondering if there's a particular Vadi and Sabvadi for this raga.
Yes, I covered it briefly, but I'll state again. The only swara in this raga that has a position as a nyasa both in the aro and the avro, that has a position as a grahaswara in both the aro and the avro, is the pancham. Therefore, the pancham has to be the vadi of this raga. By definition, then, the samvadi is not re, because re is a minor note, it's an anuvadi. The shadja has to be the samvadi. So pancham shadja is the vadi samvadi of the raga.
Okay, I think this is sort of a follow-up. Akhil is asking, because there are many other ragas that are at the risk of being lost in time, what are the next steps that need to be taken to ensure they survive, including making sure that Anjani Todi continues to see the light of day?
Documentation. Don't be afraid to sing things. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Check with sources. Check with multiple sources. Document what you find out. Think about how these sources work together, how they don't work together. There's so much work to be done. And somebody like Akhil, somebody like Kishan, young musicians, young minds who are involved in this art need to look at these rags. They need to look at these rags. There are a lot of people who will sing Madhuvanti for you or Hamsadwani for you. Not important. That's well documented. I don't need another Purya Dhanashri. I need people to be singing these rags. These are important.
This was my question. For those of us in the audience who are not as enjoying the music itself, what do you think we should take away from this interaction?
What I'd like people to take away is that there is deep aesthetics in quote unquote avghad rags, achup rags. There's a lot that is beautiful about rags that are not commonly heard. And that just because a rag is not popular doesn't mean that it's not worth listening to. And in fact, we need to try and understand the beauty of what is there aside from the popular rags. I would hope that when I sing an achup rag, I'm able to provide some insight into part of the aesthetic of that achup raga. And as an audience member, you need to grasp onto that, understand what that is, and hopefully in that process slowly bend the minds of artists to actually explore those ragas themselves, so that what's presented on stage is not just the set of ragas that we always hear.
Can you give some more examples of other disappearing ragas, as Prithvi would like to refer to?
There's a ton of them. It's Prithvi's question. Prithvi, you and I will sit and look through a few sources. There's hundreds of them. There's hundreds of them. I mean, I can name, like, there's Sansgiri, there's Sri Tanki, there's Maharashtra Tang, there is Triveni, this is all in one thought, by the way. Every thought has a whole bunch of them. Okay.
Arijit, just a point to add, when you talked about the exploration of these rags, even within this there are gradations, right? If we can like talk about ragas that were even popular in the early 20th century, which not many people sing. I'm just maybe right, maybe not right. There was that, or let's say even Asadari to be as opposed to Bhairav. So even in that, I think this is a very is a key dimension, right, of Rag Sangeet, where you explore how you construct and how you basically bring to life something that has not been in vogue, based on checking with multiple sources, looking at documentation, looking at compositions, forming your own aesthetic, as you rightly said. What does it make sense of aesthetically?
Yes, it's actually a little astounding for me because Kamal and I were talking about something. Kamal has just started his study of Rag Bhairav, right? Rag Bhairav. Everybody should know Rag Bhairav. Anybody who's learned music knows Rag Bhairav. Not so. Can I have the Tanpura, please, just slightly? This is not supposed to be a Nachup Rag. Everybody should know this. But if you ask people what is Rag Bhairav, Sa re ga ma pa da ni sa sa ni da pa ma ga re sa. That's not Rag Bhairav. Rag Bhairav is re na te na re na re na re na te ta re na What am I trying to point out? Even something as simple as Bhairav is not linear. Actually, Bhairav is a Vakra Raga. And that, why is it Bhairav? Why is it Vakra like this? Because it's symbolic of Shiva's Bhushan, the snakes, the serpents. So it's a this is the chalan of Bhairav. Nothing moves straight. Everything is vakra. So if that is not understood, you don't have Bhairav. It's not going to be Bhairav. So this kind of knowledge, and as you were saying, Asavari, how many people understand that Asavari, when you're singing Asavari, Shuddha Rishabh Asavari, the Nyasa is on Ma in one direction, Pa on the other. And that's what differentiates it from Jaunpuri. How many people understand that Jaunpuri and Asavari are differentiated the same way Adana and Darbari are differentiated? Asavari is the mother raga of Darbari, and therefore it has to have the weight of Darbari. So without that, you can't sing Shuddha Rishabh Asavari. You will sing Jaunpuri. So these are bits and pieces of knowledge that somehow are slowly escaping our notice as musicians and connoisseurs and listeners. And
There are a couple of questions, and I'll just go in order. Since you were talking about Bhairav and going back to something you mentioned earlier, because of the popularity of evening concerts, is it that the morning and afternoon ragas are more ignored as compared to others?
in the US, yes. I don't know about India. In the US, yeah, it is. I think there are more morning concerts than there used to be, but even when there's morning concerts, right, I don't want to hear Ahir Bhairav necessarily. I would rather hear Bhairav. You know, people want to sing Ahir Bhairav, yeah, Al Bela Sajanai of the fine, whatever. But who sings, a really nice Bhairav? Or all the prakars of Bhairav? Shivmad Bhairav, Bhavmad Bhairav.
Going out of order, but there was a follow-up on exactly that idea. Are there reasons why one, something like Bhairav tied out against ragas like Ahir Bhairav, are there reasons why one would be preferred over another?
I think ragas come into the consciousness of popular culture every so often, sometimes through the medium of Bollywood, sometimes other mediums. And once it infests the consciousness of popular culture, then it's everywhere. And then, and also there's this weird desire to explore scales that are not that interesting. Hamsadvani, Saraswati, the thing is, those are simple for a person who's listening to access, but what is the artist capable of doing in Hamsadvani? And frankly, I think one has to be an artist of Amir Khan Saab's caliber to bring out a Hamsadvani that means something to people. And I don't know what's happened after that in Hamsadvani.
Going back to Anjani Todi, for a rag like this, that is an amalgamation of many other ragas, what is an intuitive way to think about its uniqueness? Do you think about this rag in terms of all the other ragas that you mentioned, or is there any other way you conceive of them directly?
No, so what I've done is a dissection for you. So it's like being in biology lab, except we have dissected a raga, right? The bones and muscles and tissue and parts of a raga do not constitute the raga, no more than bones, muscles, tissues of an organism constitute the organism. The organism is living as a living, breathing entity. So when you sing a raga, you start to go into dialogue with that raga. So you have sung something in that raga, the next thing suggests itself. Perhaps it will be a phrase from Barwa, perhaps it will be a phrase from Desi or something else, Bhairav or whatever, Chandrakons. Fine. That's at a molecular level, not important. What you're trying to do is create an aesthetic, and that aesthetic is basically a dialogue that you're having with that raga. And it's that procession of that dialogue that creates the sense of the raga, creates the beauty of the raga. And the holistic picture of it is what's important.
And can you talk a little bit more about how a researcher of this music ought to decide which sources are more or less valuable or reliable as compared to others?
That question is from Kishan. It's difficult. I think the best that one can do is, well, there are certain sources that are considered part of the canon, right? The canon of literature. Bhatkandeji is one source like that. Rag Vignan is another source like that. Then in certain gharanas like Bishnupur, there are a set of books that were written by the great pandits of that school. They are authorities in that style of music, and you have to respect what they've written with regard to that school. So in different contexts, there are different sources that you have to look at. Within a particular tradition, if you have conflicting sources, then all you can say is that this is what this source says, this is what this source says. This is the evidence this provides is what this provides. Here's the conflict. This is what makes sense to me. Like in this case, I've looked at what Jha Sahab has said. To me, this is my own personal opinion. A raga doing one thing in the Tar Saptak and one thing in the Madhya Saptak, one thing in the Mandra Saptak doesn't really make a lot of sense. It's not that it doesn't happen, it does happen, but it's not something that ought to differentiate a raga. So, I mean, there are certain aspects like Chayanat has one particular characteristic in the Mandra Saptak for the use of Komalni. It has a very different characteristic of the Komalni in the Madhya Saptak. Mm-hmm. You cannot mirror them, correct. But those cannot be characteristics that define the raga. There are other things that push the definition of the raga. So in the case that Jha Sahab has provided, it's a little difficult for me to just look past the few kind of idiosyncratic things that he's provided. So obviously who am I to say that Jha Sahab didn't know it? I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that to me it makes more sense to look at what Bhatkandeji has provided and try to create a path through the material that he's provided. No more questions? Thank you so much. And I'm always available for questions if things occur to you later. Once again, my deepest thanks to... okay.
Go ahead, Sureshi. So I think we should do this session with one Prachalit Rag.
Oh, sure. I'd love to.
Should we do that?
Yeah.
Definitely so this whole construction, aesthetic exploration in the context of even for a person like me,
Mm-hmm.
takes a little bit of involvement and thinking if it is in a Prachalit Rag. But if it is a Prachalit Rag, relatively, let's say Marva or Shri, if we do the construct, I think it will definitely be beneficial for everybody.
Absolutely. Happy to do it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
No, not at all. Anything else? Anything else? Come across? No? Going once, going twice, gone. Okay, thank you so much. It was a real pleasure to do this as part of Sahabhāva. Again, my deepest thanks to Akhil and his team, ICMSV, Ashta Alliance, Caesar, and all the other organizations that have put in their resources and time to make this happen.